1 minute ago, British politics went nuclear. Keir Starmer, the man who swore to bring honesty back to Westminster, has just resigned live on air. Yes, you heard that right. The Labour leader is gone, and what happened in the seconds after his announcement has sent shockwaves through the entire country. Parliament is in meltdown. Labour HQ is in panic. And Westminster insiders are whispering that this is not just a resignation, it's the total collapse of an entire political movement. It was an ordinary afternoon in Westminster until it wasn't. For days, rumours had been swirling about Keir Starmer's future, but few believed he would actually go. His team had been pushing out statements claiming he was focused on the job, but his sudden silence told a different story. For nearly 3 days, Starmer vanished from public view. No interviews, no press conferences, no appearances in Parliament, nothing. Journalists camped outside his house, hoping to catch even a glimpse, but every hour that passed without a word only made the speculation worse. MPs were reportedly holding frantic calls behind closed doors, demanding answers, while Labour insiders whispered that something massive was about to happen. Then came the moment that froze the nation. At exactly 11:31 a.m, black government cars rolled up outside Labour Party HQ. The media swarmed, cameras flashing, microphones ready. Senior Labour figures were seen entering the building with grim faces, some pale, some visibly shaken. Social media lit up with rumours. This is it. He's gone. And then, moments later, the doors opened and Keir Starmer appeared. He looked like a man carrying the weight of the entire country on his shoulders. His suit was pressed, but his face was ashen, his shoulders heavy. He walked into the press room without a smile, without a wave. The room went dead silent. Reporters didn't need confirmation. They could feel it. Something historic was about to happen. When Starmer finally spoke, the words landed like a bomb. "For the good of my party and my country," he said slowly, "I am resigning as leader of the Labour Party with immediate effect." The room erupted in gasps. Journalists scrambled to tweet, newsrooms cut to breaking news banners, and within seconds, hashtags like Starmer resigns, Labour collapse, and hashtag political meltdown were trending worldwide. But the resignation was only the beginning. Inside Labour panic spread like wildfire. Some senior figures rushed to draft carefully worded statements praising his service. Others wasted no time throwing him under the bus, blaming him for the collapse of Labour's credibility and warning that the party was now in existential danger. Leaked WhatsApp messages from MPs painted a brutal picture, some calling him a liar, others accusing him of betraying millions of voters. The man who had once promised to clean up politics had just walked away under a cloud of disgrace, leaving his party to pick up the pieces. Outside Labour HQ, the reaction was instant and furious. Protesters gathered within minutes, shouting chants of "Bercy," "Betrayal," and "Never again Labour" into live BBC cameras. One man told reporters, "He promised us integrity, but gave us nothing but lies." Another woman broke down in tears, saying she'd supported Labour her whole life, but could never trust them again. Phone lines to radio shows exploded with angry callers. Across the country, voters said they felt deceived, humiliated, and disgusted. By midday, Westminster was in chaos. Shadow cabinet ministers began resigning one after another, some claiming they had no confidence in the party's direction, others calling for a total reset of Labour's leadership. Trade unions, once Starmer's strongest allies, released blistering statements demanding new leadership and threatening to cut funding if the party didn't change course. Far from calming the crisis, Starmer's resignation had poured petrol on an already burning fire. And then came the whispers that Starmer hadn't stepped down by choice at all. Some MPs claimed he had been forced out by powerful figures inside the party who feared an electoral disaster. Others suggested the pressure came from outside Labour, altogether unions, donors, even back channels from Number 10. Whatever the truth, one thing was certain. This wasn't just a resignation. This was a political earthquake, and Britain was only beginning to feel the aftershocks. Within hours of Starmer's resignation, the Labour Party was no longer a political organisation. It was a battlefield. MPs, who had once stood shoulder to shoulder, were suddenly at war with each other, jostling for survival in what one insider described as the bloodiest day in modern politics. Shadow cabinet members who had been silent for days rushed to put out statements, some praising Starmer's sacrifice, while others accused him of single-handedly destroying Labour's credibility. The split was immediate and brutal. Reporters outside Westminster were bombarded with leaks and anonymous quotes, each one more damning than the last. "He lied to us, he lied to the public, and he dragged us down with him," one MP messaged to Sky News. Their words splashed across headlines within minutes. Meanwhile, Labour HQ descended into what staffers called a total meltdown. Phones rang non-stop with angry local organisers demanding answers, volunteers threatening to quit, and donors cancelling pledges in real time. One senior Labour official admitted privately, "We are losing control. The machine is collapsing." Constituency chairs across the country began passing emergency motions of no confidence in the national leadership, with some threatening to cut ties completely. Inside the party, the knives were out. Names of potential successors began circulating like wildfire. Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Lisa Nandy, Andy Burnham. But no clear favourite emerged. Instead, the infighting deepened. Some MPs warned that backing Rayner would only keep the party tied to Starmer's legacy of failure, while others argued that anyone from the old guard would doom Labour to extinction. By late afternoon, journalists described the atmosphere in Westminster as apocalyptic. Rival factions held secret meetings in pubs and private offices across London, quietly plotting coups and leadership challenges. Leaked WhatsApp messages showed MPs openly tearing each other apart, with one writing bluntly, "It's survival of the fittest now, every man for himself." The media, sensing blood, pounced. Tabloid front pages screamed Labour in free fall, while broadsheets ran scathing editorials asking whether Labour was still fit to be called the official opposition. Television networks aired wall-to-wall coverage, treating Starmer's downfall as the political event of the decade. Social media turned savage. TikTok and Twitter exploded, with mocking memes and viral clips of Starmer's resignation speech set to dramatic music, each one racking up millions of views within hours. Hashtags like #LabourCollapse, #StarmerFinished, and #EndOfLabour trended across the world. Even international media joined the frenzy. CNN called it the death of Britain's opposition, while German outlets compared it to a political implosion unseen since the 2008 financial crisis. Across Britain, the public's anger turned into a tidal wave. Outside constituency offices, voters gathered with homemade signs reading, "Never again," and "Labour lied." In Manchester, protesters burned Labour membership cards in front of TV cameras. In Liverpool, angry crowds surrounded the local Labour office, demanding resignations from anyone connected to Starmer's leadership. The sense of betrayal was unlike anything Westminster had seen in decades. Phone-in radio shows were overwhelmed with callers describing themselves as heartbroken, disgusted, and finished with politics altogether. One lifelong Labour voter told LBC, "I've supported this party for 40 years, but they've lost me forever." By nightfall, the crisis had spread beyond Britain's borders. European officials privately expressed alarm about whether the UK even had a functioning opposition anymore, while French and German newspapers ran front-page stories describing Labour's implosion as the end of an era. In Washington, commentators compared Starmer's resignation to Watergate, warning that Britain's political stability was now at risk. Back in London, the Conservatives wasted no time taking advantage. Senior Tory MPs flooded social media with gleeful posts mocking Labour as leaderless and broken. Downing Street released a carefully worded statement calling Starmer's resignation an overdue reckoning, a line clearly designed to bury Labour under its own hypocrisy. Nigel Farage and Reform UK smelled blood, releasing videos declaring that Labour's collapse proved their movement was the real voice of the people. Their message resonated. Polling agencies working late into the night began releasing snap polls showing Labour's numbers falling off a cliff. The Conservatives had surged into a double-digit lead, Reform UK had climbed to record highs, and even the Liberal Democrats were clawing back disillusioned voters. Analysts called it a political earthquake that could permanently reshape Britain's electoral map. And yet, the most devastating blow was still to come. By midnight, Labour staffers were quietly telling journalists that the party's finances were in freefall. Major donors had frozen funding, trade unions were suspending contributions, and campaign operations in key constituencies were being shut down. One insider described the mood as funeral-like, with staff seen crying at their desks and frantically updating CVS. The machine that had once been Britain's most powerful opposition force had ground to a halt in less than 24 hours. And the question everyone was now asking was chilling. If Labour can't recover from this, what happens to British democracy? By the next morning, it was clear that Labour was no longer functioning as a single party, but as a collection of warring tribes. The leadership vacuum left by Starmer's resignation had turned Westminster into a battlefield. MPs were no longer whispering, they were openly fighting. Secret meetings took place across London all night, with rival factions plotting to seize control of what was left of the party. Angela Rayner's allies pushed for her to step in as interim leader, framing her as the voice of the grassroots. But her critics argued she was too closely tied to Starmer's failures to offer a real reset. Wes Streeting quietly worked the phones, pitching himself as a moderniser who could rebuild Labour's image before the next election. Andy Burnham's name was suddenly everywhere, despite the fact he wasn't even in Parliament. Labour's civil war had begun, and there were no rules anymore. Leaked WhatsApp messages exploded across the press, showing senior MPs tearing into Starmer and each other in language so brutal that journalists struggled to print it. One message read, "We should have pushed him out weeks ago. Now we're all drowning." Another replied coldly, "This isn't about saving the party. This is about saving ourselves." The betrayal was savage. MPs who had once praised Starmer were now openly disowning him, blaming him for dragging Labour into the mud. The tabloids feasted on the carnage, running screaming headlines like "Labour at war" and "The party that betrayed Britain." Television news channels devoted entire segments to charting Labour's collapse, using graphics that showed the party's polling numbers falling like a stone. Commentators compared it to the Lib Dem collapse after 2010, but warned this was far worse. This wasn't just a bad election cycle, this was an existential crisis, and outside Westminster, the public reaction was reaching boiling point. Protesters gathered in cities across the UK, their anger growing louder by the hour. In Birmingham, placards reading "Never Again Labour" filled the streets. In Glasgow, furious activists set fire to Labour membership cards while TV crews filmed live. Constituency offices across the country were swamped with calls from members demanding refunds, some even threatening to sue the party for betrayal. Social media was a firestorm. TikTok was flooded with videos mocking Labour's collapse. Twitter hashtags like #LabourLies, #LabourDead, and #StarmerBetrayed were trending globally, as users shared clips of Starmer's resignation speech alongside footage of protests chanting crowds and crying staffers. YouTube streams analysing every second of Starmer's downfall racked up record-breaking views, turning Labour's implosion into the biggest political spectacle of the decade. The damage wasn't just political, it was financial. Unions that had bankrolled Labour for decades began pulling their support with ruthless efficiency. Unite announced it was suspending all financial contributions until a radical leadership change was made. The GMB called the party toxic and warned it was no longer fit to represent workers. These moves weren't symbolic, they were fatal. Without union money, Labour's campaign machine simply stopped. Regional offices shut their doors overnight. Constituency campaigns were cancelled. Staffers whispered about bankruptcy, saying they didn't know how they would even pay salaries by the end of the month. Donors vanished. High-profile backers who had written million-pound cheques during the last election refused to return calls. Even small grassroots donations collapsed as ordinary members cancelled subscriptions in disgust. And all the while, Labour's opponents capitalised on the chaos. Rishi Sunak's Conservatives held emergency meetings at Number 10 to plan how to exploit Labour's implosion. Ministers appeared on every major news network, presenting themselves as the only stable force left in Britain. Tory MPs took to social media with open glee, posting memes and mocking Labour as finished. But behind closed doors, some Conservatives admitted they were worried. A strong opposition was necessary for democracy, and Labour's collapse left a dangerous vacuum that fringe movements were racing to fill. Reform UK surged in the polls overnight, climbing to numbers that analysts said could turn them into a real parliamentary force. Nigel Farage appeared in a late-night broadcast, grinning from ear to ear, declaring that Labour's demise was the beginning of a new political revolution. Internationally, the fallout was intensifying. European leaders expressed alarm at the chaos gripping Britain's main opposition. French officials privately warned that Britain's credibility as a negotiating partner was badly damaged. German newspapers declared that Labour's collapse had shaken faith in British democracy itself. In Washington, US officials were briefed on the situation, with one analyst describing it as a strategic nightmare for America's closest ally. What had begun as a domestic scandal over secret donor meetings was now an international crisis, with global headlines calling it the death of integrity politics. By Tuesday night, Labour was no longer a party in crisis. It was a party on the brink of extinction. Its MPs were tearing each other apart in full public view. Its money had dried up. Its voters were deserting in droves, and its rivals were circling like vultures. The resignation that was supposed to provide closure had instead unleashed a political storm of historic proportions. Westminster insiders warned that the next 48 hours could decide whether Labour survived as a major political force or disappeared entirely. By Wednesday morning, the Labour Party was no longer simply in crisis, it was in freefall. The opposition benches in Parliament looked like the aftermath of a shipwreck. MPs shouted over each other in a desperate scramble to seize control of the ruins. Leadership contenders were openly launching their campaigns, not weeks or months later, but hours after Starmer's resignation. Angela Rayner released a carefully worded statement promising stability, while Wes Streeting gave interviews positioning himself as the man to rebuild trust. Lisa Nandy's team began quietly briefing journalists that she was the unity candidate, while Andy Burnham loyalists whispered that only a complete outsider could save the party. But unity was nowhere to be found. Every new leadership bid seemed to tear the party apart even further. Leaked audio recordings surfaced of Labour MPs calling each other traitors and careerists, their voices shaking with rage. The picture emerging was one of a party not simply fractured but shattered into pieces. Reporters described the mood in Westminster as darker than anything seen since the expenses scandal. But this time, the damage was far deeper. This wasn't just about individual MPs. This was about whether Labour could survive at all. The public had already made up its mind. By midday, fresh polling figures showed Labour had crashed to its lowest level in modern history, falling below even the Liberal Democrats in some key constituencies. Reform UK surged again, with analysts warning they could overtake Labour in northern seats once considered untouchable. Focus groups across the country painted a grim picture. Former Labour voters used words like betrayed, disgusted, and finished. Young voters, once considered Labour's strongest base, declared they would never vote again. One disillusioned supporter in Manchester told reporters, "This isn't just about Starmer, this is about an entire party that lied to us." In Glasgow, activists said Labour was dead on arrival and called for the party to be replaced by a completely new movement. Inside Labour HQ, the atmosphere was described by one staffer as apocalyptic. Emails leaked to the press showed desperate attempts to cancel upcoming fundraising events, with high-profile donors demanding refunds. Constituency chairs frantically tried to reassure members, but even their local teams were resigning in protest. In some offices, volunteers simply walked out, leaving piles of leaflets on the floor. Campaign apps were deleted en masse. Some regional branches announced they were suspending all operations until a new leader was chosen, effectively shutting down Labour's ground game just months before a possible general election. The human toll on Keir Starmer himself was becoming painfully clear. Security around his home was increased after reports of harassment and protests outside his residence. Friends described him as hollowed out, saying he had barely spoken since stepping down. His wife, Victoria, had not been seen in public, and their children were reportedly kept at home under protection. What was meant to be a dignified resignation had turned into a personal and political nightmare. Commentators compared his fall to the most spectacular downfalls in British political history, some saying it was worse than Jeremy Corbyn's defeat or even Tony Blair's post-Iraq collapse. This wasn't just the end of a career, it was the public dismantling of a man's entire legacy. And yet, the chaos showed no sign of slowing. By nightfall, unions escalated their revolt. Unite's General Secretary went on live television to announce that they were withdrawing all financial and organisational support until Labour proved it could earn the trust of workers again. The GMB doubled down, calling Labour a party of betrayal and urging its members to stop campaigning. These announcements were devastating. They didn't just strip Labour of money, they stripped it of its soul. The party that had been founded to represent workers had just been abandoned by them. The media coverage turned even more brutal. Tabloids ran front pages with headlines like "Labour are out" and "The Party That Betrayed Britain." Broadsheets published editorials asking if Labour's time as a major political force had come to an end. Television networks treated the implosion like a national drama, running rolling coverage and inviting historians to discuss whether Britain was witnessing the death of a century-old movement. International outlets piled on, with CNN declaring it the end of integrity politics, and French papers asking whether Britain could still be trusted as a partner if it had no credible opposition. Even Number 10 began to look uneasy. While Conservative MPs mocked Labour relentlessly, some in government privately admitted that a completely broken opposition posed risks for democracy. Who do we even run against